Welcome back to Nature News, everybody. I'm Alice, and this is your weekly updates on nature, science, and environmental policy. I cannot believe it's already fall and the first week of October. There's a lot of exciting stuff to be sharing with you this week, so let's get into it. It was actually a pretty tough week here in the US. We had a really nasty presidential debate on Tuesday night, which brought up a lot of deep-seated things in me about the environment. But I do have some fun stuff to share. Before we get into that though, make sure you hit the subscribe button, give this video a like if you love nature, and don't forget to turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. This week is actually Fat Bear Week, and no, I didn't eat too many cookies or I wouldn't be able to fit into this shirt. Every year in Alaska's Katmai National Park and Preserve, the Alaskan brown bear actually spends its summer eating 4,500 calorie-laden salmon, and they transform into rotund giants, some weighing over 1,000 pounds. Now, the park actually has an annual playoff-like competition where you can actually vote on which bear is going to be the fattest. They have voting from September 30th until October 6th, and you can actually watch the bears via a live stream on explore.org. And I will say, from watching this from time to time, I highly recommend it. It's really fun to watch the bears fishing for salmon, and if you need a pick-me-up, it's the perfect thing. If you're like me, you probably live in a city. Do you know where the nearest green space is? Well, sadly, this all depends on your income level and where you live. People with lower incomes and minorities are almost always in areas with little access to green space, less trees, and more pollution, making them more susceptible to disease, obesity, and even lowered IQ scores. Now, this is a huge problem around the world that I'd love to talk about more in future episodes. If this is something that worries you, please drop a comment. Plastic is everywhere these days. It's in the food we eat, the fish we catch, and even in every part of the ocean. In 2017, just 8% of plastic was recycled, and more countries are actually not accepting plastic waste, which means our recycling here in the US and many other countries is actually either sitting in landfills or stuck on ships in the middle of the ocean. Now, plastic is a huge issue and one we all need to be more conscious of. So join me this Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube for a discussion on plastic, on recycling, and on steps we can take to have less plastic in our lives. Send me your questions and concerns using the hashtag #NatureNews on any of my social media platforms. Now, as I said, the presidential debates were this week, and while I have a lot of things I'd like to say about them, I'm going to stick with this one thing. Now, President Trump in his speech actually said he wanted our country to have clean air and clean water. Well, if you ask me, he's a total liar because he's rolled back more environmental regulations than any other president, more than 100. So I'm not really sure how that could ever be a true statement of him wanting us to have clean water and clean air, because everything he has done so far in the last 3 years has actually harmed our water, harmed our air. And a new analysis actually showed these rollbacks could add 1.8 billion tons of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere over the next 15 years. On top of that, we would see more degradation of our streams, our wetlands, our drinking water, our air quality, as well as preventing us harm from climate change. There's a lot of things that these environmental rollbacks would harm. Now, this week, much of the world met for a virtual UN Global Summit on Biodiversity. And back in 2010, world leaders actually gathered in Japan for the UN Summit on Biodiversity. Then they pledged to reduce pollution, save species, protect biodiversity, and much more. But unfortunately, none of these countries have actually met their goals. This week, 70 countries signed new pledges, but the US did not participate. Signatories encouraged others to agree to a 10-point pledge to clamp down on pollution, embrace sustainable economic systems, and eliminate the dumping of plastic waste into our oceans by the middle of the century as part of the summit's meaningful actions. Now, deforestation and the loss of biodiversity add to the threat of diseases like COVID-19 and limit our resilience against air and water pollution as well as species loss. And many of the countries made pledges to do just that. But some, like Brazil, actually vowed to continue exploiting the country's natural resources. President Bolsonaro, who has been pretty much terrible on the environment, actually attacked what he calls international greed, that other countries wanted to protect the Amazon, and said that them and Brazil have the right to use their natural resources however they want, and they plan to do just that. Also notable was a thinly veiled message to China from Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno, who called on countries to self-regulate their fishing activities in the waters around the Galapagos Islands. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago there was an armada of Chinese fishing vessels around the Galapagos. This was in response to that. I do wish that he had called them out a little bit more aggressively in this statement, but I'm glad he made a statement nonetheless. Now, if you want a full list of all the countries that participated and some of the things they pledged, you can actually go to the link in the description for more on all of that. Colorado is the first state in the nation to adopt a new set of rules requiring oil and gas companies to monitor their emissions from fracking and meet tighter emission standards on motors used at drill sites. So this surprised me because I already thought there were regulations on air quality from fracking, but I guess there were not. So this was like a serious WTF moment for me, and one of the most contentious issues is how site emissions would be monitored. Now, the rules leave it up to the driller to select the technology, emissions, and the protocol for mining. Yeah, you heard that correctly. And I have to add to this because this is one of the biggest issues with environmental regulation in this country. Now, the EPA and other subgroups of it don't have enough oversight, they don't have enough personnel, and industry is actually expected to self-monitor their own pollution and wrongdoing. And I think we know how well that has gone from history and all the huge environmental lawsuits that have happened in the history of this country. Now, there's more news out of Alaska today in the ongoing saga of opening our last pristine wilderness to some sort of destruction. Now, the Trump administration last Friday actually finalized a plan to open up 9 million acres of the Tongass National Forest to logging and road construction. And the reason this is a big deal is because climate scientists point out that the Tongass, which is also one of the world's largest temperate rainforests, actually offers a very important service to not just people here in the United States, but people all over the planet. And that's because it's one of the world's largest carbon sinks. It stores the equivalent of about 8% of the carbon stored in all of the forests in the lower 48 states. And if Trump is reelected, this will most likely for sure happen. But if you get out and vote, you make your voice heard, you go to the polls, or you vote by mail, we can see that these things do not happen. And we can see that those 100 environmental regulations that he has rolled back do not go into effect. On that note, if you have an environmental concern or even something positive that you want to talk about that's happening in your neighborhood or that's a concern for you somewhere around the world, share it with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or right here on YouTube using the hashtag Nature News. And don't forget to join me right here on Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific time for a talk on plastic. We're going to talk about all kinds of things plastic, from what you can do at home to reduce the amount of plastic you use, to what it is doing to our oceans, to our air, and to our land. So join me on Sunday for that chat. Leave me a comment, leave a question, whatever you want to talk about, leave it below and we'll chat about it on Sunday. That's all I have for you this week. And as always, I am so thankful that you have joined me here to talk about nature and how we can do a better job protecting it. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button, share this video with a friend so we can grow this community. Don't forget to hit that like button. You can watch one of these other videos from my channel if you're into nature or if you want to watch more adventures and hikes. And don't forget to subscribe. Like I said, I will see you tomorrow on Sunday at 11 a.m.